Well, the bell outside my window here tells me it's 1 o'clock, so it must be time to start a webinar. We do have a couple people still signing on, so we'll hang on just a minute. People are just getting in. Glad you were able to join us today. Very odd circumstance. I don't know what was happening, but I wasn't able to get in. So nothing like hosting a webinar, presenting a webinar, and not even being able to get into any meeting. So it's a joy. We'll wait just a couple of minutes here. Yeah, still got a couple more. Hey, Ken, good to see your name. Haven't talked to you in a long time. Ken used to be in Missouri, where I was in Missouri still, and then moved off to Illinois, and I moved off to Nebraska. Mm-hmm. I think we'll go ahead and get started this afternoon. It's so great to be with you today. God's blessings to you all. And we're going to take a little bit different approach. I know partnerships among congregations is what we're focusing primarily on today. And quite typically, this is a bit of a nebulous circumstance, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But I am going to share with you a couple of resources that I think will be particularly helpful, and then we'll have a chance to go through these two resources, and then I'll give you the link to access them and a little more information about them. And at the end, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat feature. You can type them at the top of where the attendee list is on the left-hand side. There's a little arrow there. You can type your type your questions in the attendee chat, or up at the top, there's a little audience questions button. Feel free to use the audience questions button and type them there. And Jenna McMiller, who's hosting with me today, will take down your questions. She is my right hand now with RSTM, so we're so glad Jenna's with us. And gosh, Jenna, this is the first time you've been the host of the webinar, and I'm the one doing the presenting. So this is kind of exciting, huh?
Ooh, yeah.
So as exciting as webinars can be, I know everybody's getting a little zoomed out, so I myself am getting a little tired of that. But anyway, so it's good to be here. Give me those questions as we move along, and let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, I give you thanks for granting us the opportunity to serve you in so many and various ways. And as we do so, Lord, we realize that sometimes it is so much better when we work together. And we pray, Lord, that as we talk about partnerships today, you would guide and bless our activities and our questions and the information we receive, that it might benefit the ministries we all represent, which we know are your ministry to begin with. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All righty, so I am going to pull up my screen here to share with you guys, and hopefully this works properly. Normally we share a what is going on? Here we go. All right, here we go. Now, normally I would share a PowerPoint with you, but these resources that I'm sharing, Jenny, I'm just going to check. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
The font's just a little small.
Yep. I'm going to take down my picture. Normally I would leave that up, but you don't need to see my mug. And we're going to make this just a little bit bigger for you so you can see it a little bit better. And So we're going to take a look at these, and primarily I had the benefit of being on a consortium, if you will, of people who were interested primarily in working on developing partnerships and different models of partnerships between congregations. And it was started, or I guess gathered together by the Kansas district and Dan Galshut down there, who's the mission and ministry facilitator or vice president, whatever the name is now. And Dan did a great job of gathering a group together that could talk about this. And these are some resources that were developed out of that. And right now, this is becoming, and I don't need to tell you this, but this is becoming such a big topic because there is so much gathering around the idea of partnerships because of necessity, with COVID and with the things that we have going on in our society and in our lives and in the church and lockdowns and all of these things. We're having to look to be rather creative about how we're going to take care of things and how to continue ministry. And so what I wanted to do today is really share with you two primary resources, both of which can be found on the Kansas District website and also on the Making Disciples for Life website with the LCMS. So these were developed, like I said, much of this information, or a great deal of this information, was brought together by different people. RSTM, we had a lot of things available to us, and there's more data on that. On that website, on the Kansas District website. I'll share the link with you after a bit, and the chat feature. And also, there's much of that same information was developed from stuff that we had here at RSTM. So we have that available either on our website, or we can provide you with that if you contact me or get a hold of Jenna, and we'd be glad to share any of that with you. So really just starting out here, I wanted to take a look at this partnership planning process. And this is really a key document, if you will. This was a lot of hours of conversation talking about how to best approach the idea of partnerships. And this isn't really a document that has to be used solely for a congregation to congregation partnership, but there are different models which we could look at. Entrepreneurial partnerships, community partnerships. There's several different ways you can go, but this particular process which we came up with is particularly helpful in guiding the direction and the conversations within your congregation so that you can start to develop a plan. And like I said, or I have said so many times in the past, having a plan is absolutely key. So often, what happens in our congregations is we panic, or we feel like we're in survival mode. We don't know how we're going to continue. We feel this sense of necessity, and so we start grasping. How can we make this work? And I've seen congregations do this over and over. The only way we're going to stay alive, the only way we're going to keep our lights on and the doors open, and somebody preaching the word and administering the sacraments on a weekly basis is if we get into a partnership. And so they rush out and find somebody that's in a similar situation, and you take two congregations which kind of just sort of rush into it, or out of necessity jump into this partnership together without a whole lot of planning. And I think if we did this in our marriages, well, things are going to fall apart pretty fast. And the same thing happens with partnerships. They tend to be dysfunctional. They tend to not work well with a focus on mission and ministry, but they have their focus simply on budget and finance and personal preference. That's a whole separate webinar, but I talk an awful lot about that. If we do things solely out of panic or solely out of budgetary reasons, well, then we're not going to have the long-term benefit of partnering together that we have when we raise the conversation up and we start looking at, okay, we've got a vital ministry here to at least this group of people that we're ministering to now, and they have a vital ministry, and how can we use this to benefit the kingdom? And what can we do to further the gospel of Jesus Christ through this partnership? And so this is where we want to go with this. So this partnership planning process, and I know it may be difficult to read, I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger for you so you can at least see what I'm looking at. But this was developed. So really, we come at this with what are our expectations? So that's kind of the key first question. And so where are we going with this? And what we have here is a series of questions to kind of guide and direct how we start these conversations. So we need to find out, first of all, who we are. Too often, we may have a caricature of who we are. In our panic, we all know when when you look in the mirror, you've got typically a person will look in the mirror and they'll see kind of a caricature of themselves, and all the things we don't like will stand out glaringly, and maybe the things that aren't so bad about ourselves we don't even notice. And so this is an opportunity for us to take a self-assessment. We need to evaluate who we are. Uh, Revitality has the new CADS assessment, which is fantastic, and I really recommend that. And you can access that on the LCMS Revitality site. You can do asset mapping. Any way that you can come to an understanding of who we are. I have a series of questions that I often ask. What is the church? What should the church be doing? What are we not doing? Where are our limitations? Where are our blessings? All of these things. Any way that we can come up with a really true self-assessed picture of where our mission and ministry efforts are now. Now, you didn't hear me say where our congregation is, where our budget is, but where our mission and ministry in this congregation at this time, where it is currently at. We really have to have a solid understanding of this, because if we don't, we have no possible way of figuring out how we can find someone that's going to complement that in a partnership. So this first step, I cannot emphasize enough, is so very key. We have to understand who we are. And I don't care if you're doing just straight strategic planning for your own congregation, if you're doing strategic planning in order to enter into a partnership, really, regardless, having an understanding of who you are at this time, and not a 40-year-old caricature of who you were, or some kind of doom and gloom caricature of who you think we might become, but an understanding of who we are right now is critical. And so that's why that first question is who are we? We have to conduct this self-evaluation. And then what we want to do in this assessment portion of this process is take a look at what is our mission field, what's around us, what's happening in our community, what does our mission field look like. We all have demographic reports available to us, and they're not difficult to ascertain. And so we want to take a look, what truly are the demographics of our community. Identifying what is our community. If we're out in a rural area, what is our community? To whom has God called us to serve? And we want to get a clear picture of this, because sometimes we think, oh, there's no mission to be had. I know, where I'm at now in Nebraska, there are 4 or 5 congregations right here in our community. If you added up the total membership of all of these congregations, it's well over the population of our town of a couple thousand. And yet, there are people all around us that haven't heard the word. We need to identify what is truly our mission field and where we're at, because it's an understanding of who we are and then where has God planted us that gives us an idea of how we can move into the future and what we need to do and what makes sense as far as partnership types. Who are our potential ministry partners? Could we work well with somebody? Maybe somebody we're working with already. Maybe we have kind of an informal partnership that we'd like to make more formal because we're already working together. Maybe we can share things in small ways, youth group, older adult ministries. These types of things can be shared in a minimal way. So what is the potential? Where can we identify people with whom we could have a potential partnership that would make sense? Now, it's not saying you're going to do any of these things with any of these people, but it's putting it down, literally listing it out, so we have an idea of what our options might be. This is a very sanctified use of our reason, right? I go back to this all the time, but the Lord gave us our reason and all our senses, right? And we want to use those in service to the work that He has called us to do. So understanding who we are, what's the mission field around us, and what are our potential ministry partners. This is a way that we can really have a clear picture of how we can do things if we decide to move on to the next question. Do we want to move forward? Now, this is a hard question to ask because, quite honestly, I have worked with numerous congregations over my years with RSTM and even before when I was working with congregations in a more informal manner. I've had congregations who went through these steps. They got to the end of the steps and they said, you know what? We've identified that this isn't something we want to continue pursuing. We've just identified that it's just not somewhere we want to go. We're not equipped to do this at this time. And okay, that's the way we go. And so if it's a yes, we move on and we start the planning process for partnering. If not, we have to look at our other options or solutions. While they may not be particularly palatable, we have to deal in reality. We all have the reality of what God is calling us to do, and at times, and we can drive around the countryside and see old church buildings that have closed up and or been converted into something else. Remember the one where the cemetery next door was still there, and we still took care of it, but the church itself had been modified into a hay barn, and that was the end of its life. And that happens. That's okay. We don't like it, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But it's a reality, and we want to face that reality. So maybe it is closing our doors. I don't know. I can't say that. Maybe it's going into some sort of bivocational situation. Maybe it's closing one and opening another door. So these are kind of things that need to be answered at this point. But if the answer is yes, we want to continue looking into how we can effectually enter into some sort of partnership. This is where we want to move next. So we've done our assessment. We figured out who we are, where we're planted, what's around us, and with whom we might potentially partner. And then what we do is we move into the actual planning process. So how can we start to really seriously take a look at what type of plan might be made in order to formulate a more formal partnership to keep things going? And this is where we start asking ourselves some different questions. So we once again, we back up a little bit. With whom are we partnering currently? With whom are we partnering? So maybe it's through a circuit. Maybe it's a neighboring circuit. Maybe there's a congregation with whom we've had a particular affinity. We need to identify with whom we are actually partnering currently. In more formal or informal ways. Maybe it's just once a year that we're getting together to do a particular thing, a particular event, which right now that's not happening much at all. But perhaps in the past, maybe it has. And this also, I should mention, all of this. All of this COVID and all of this lockdown and suspension of activities has really shined a new light on this. How can we work together in better ways so that we continue to proclaim the gospel of Jesus when people so desperately need it? And so, with whom are we partnering? And then, what models are available? Now, we're going to talk more about models in just a little bit, specific models. But what models are available? What types of partnership might we want to enter into? And there's a myriad of different models out there. I will share some that we collected through this group. But there's far more, and there's all sorts of variations on the different models. So what I'll be sharing with you after a bit isn't prescriptive, but it's descriptive. It shows you what maybe is out there, but how can we formulate this so that it meets our particular needs and will best fit how we can partner together with a congregation or two congregations or whatever the case may be. So we want to take a look at this and really have a serious conversation about that. Then we ask the question, if we're starting in this phase, where might we need to circle back? And this is something we mentioned quite a few times. Where do we need to circle back? Let's reevaluate. Have we missed anything up to this point? And that's a really important thing to do. I worked with two congregations at one point in my RSTM career, and they were kind of talking past each other an awful lot. And so it was necessary to keep bringing them back into that evaluation or that assessment period so that some of these questions that kept lingering would eventually be addressed. I think they were dancing around the elephant in the room, and that is often the case. And so what you wanted to do was help draw that information out so that everything was on the table. We don't want to come into any partnership with baggage that we don't know about. Again, we go back to that marriage model. If a couple's starting to come together and they're deciding that maybe marriage is the direction they want to go, and they decide to get married, they set the date, here we go, we're ready to get married, and all of a sudden you find out some sort of a historical fact. Maybe they have, are bringing a ton of debt that they just didn't bother to mention into the equation. Well, we need to get that up on the table. And so for things to really be to work out the best that they possibly can. So where do we need to circle back? Where do we need to determine if questions are still lingering? And then how are we going to manage this process? Right? What are we going to do? And we need to line this out. I find a lot of times we tend to be very informal. It's the old adage, we only go formally, especially in a lot of voters' assemblies and things of that nature. We don't go to the Constitution and bylaws until somebody has a beef about something, and then they're like, well, what do the Constitution and bylaws say? But normally in everyday activity, we just ignore them and do things however we want anyhow. Well, this is kind of the same way. We don't want to do things in such an informal fashion that we let things slide or we let things get shoddy or slipshod. Instead, we want to delineate down the line, how are we going to manage this? And so we give you some ideas there. Who's going to be involved? How many meetings are we going to have? What are the things we're going to discuss at these meetings? We need to make them very formal so that we make sure that all of those questions are, I keep pointing to my screen as if you can see what I'm pointing at, I'm sorry, so that we can see we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and that we're working towards the same goal. So how are we going to do this? And then we need to set those timelines. We need to have SMART goals, and that are specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and timely, so that we work within a time frame. Otherwise, we can drag these conversations out forever, or we can try to push them through so quickly because we so desperately want to have this resolution that we don't do things in a proper way. Several years ago, I was working with a couple of congregations, and they just wanted to gallop. And I kept having to kind of pull on the reins, as much as it pained me, because I really thought things were going to work out well for them in this partnership. But I had to pull on the reins, because if they galloped too fast, there were things that were going to not work out very well. And primarily, that falls in the realm of communication, which is our next question. Because if we don't communicate well and thoroughly, people will fill in the blanks of information, and they never fill it in with something good. Just the other day, something was said. Some information had not gotten out yet in a timely fashion, and something was said about a school. And the people that were talking to me about this were filling in the blanks, and I knew the whole story, but the people were filling in the blanks, and I said, well, that's not entirely correct. Well, they didn't have all the facts, so they filled the facts in. Of course, we know in our day and age, you don't really need to have facts. You just need to have your own truth, but that's a whole different story for another day. So, how are we going to manage this? Who's going to take the reins? Who's going to be the leadership? And we recommend establishing a task force, a subset of folks who are particularly invested in this process, and then who will bring back the information to the whole congregation and the partnering congregations, so that all the information is always out there, but you're always moving forward in the proper sequence with the end goal in mind of how we are going to take advantage of this partnership. And then again, then finally, what is our communication plan? Who needs to know what, where, when, and how are we going to disseminate that information? This is probably one of, with the exception of just not planning in the first place, this would be the second reason why uh, things fall apart in mission and ministry. And I don't care if you're talking about partnerships or in the congregation. When we fail to communicate well, when we fail to communicate well, things are going to fall apart. It just is the nature of the beast. And I don't want to seem doom and gloom with that, but the fact of the matter is, like I said, people will fill in gaps in information, and they will very rarely will they, as Luther wants us to put it, put the best construction on everything. Instead, what normally happens is we put the worst construction on everything, and that's just not good. So, how do we inform the task force members? How do we inform our leadership? How do we inform the voters' assembly? How do we inform our congregation at large, depending on your structure? How do we inform the community? See, that's an important one too. So many times you hear rumors about a business, and especially in our rural and small town areas, you hear a rumor about a business, and the rumor sometimes even becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, we heard they're going to close, so people quit showing up. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case, but what is going to happen now? And so, who's going to do this? And then, who's going to take charge of making sure the word gets out? Because we can't assume that somebody else is going to do it. And this is a problem. And now, I know maybe some of you are thinking, and this is something I always think when I hear these things, we communicate, we put it out in the newsletter, we sent a letter out to everybody, everybody got an email, and we put it out on our Remind app, and we've communicated it, and we've tweeted it, we've Instagrammed it, we've Facebooked it, we've done all these different things, and yet there are still going to be people who come to you and say, well, I didn't know about that. Nobody said anything to me about that. Well, at that point, you can say, we sent out a letter, we sent out an email, we sent out a tweet, we sent out an Instagram, we sent out this, that, and the other thing. We snapped it, we Facebooked it, the whole 9 yards. You can say we communicated in all these different ways. And now the onus isn't on the congregation. The onus isn't on the leadership group. The onus isn't on the planning group, but the onus is on that person themselves. And so this is again why it's so very important to communicate, communicate, communicate. I cannot emphasize that enough. We just cut our legs off so often when we fail to communicate well. And that being said, sometimes we will fail. Sometimes we won't do a good job of communicating. It's just the nature of the problem that we have. We're sinful human beings. We don't do everything perfectly all the time. So, in the event that we don't communicate something, guess what? Mea culpa time. My fault. We did not communicate that in a good way. I don't know how many times I've come before congregational assemblies when we were going through our own work of partnerships and strategic planning and things of that nature. And I've had to say myself, you know what, folks, I am so sorry. We did not communicate this very well. And what we did communicate wasn't very clear. Um, that's on us. We apologize for that. Here's the right information, and here's it in its totality, and this is where we're at. And when you manage the process, the planning process well, this is very easy to do. And you can come back and make things very clear. I was just on the phone with the phone company. And the phone company, we had discontinued an old number and several months ago, back in August, and I all of a sudden got another bill, and I was able to come back and say, I documented here, here, and here. This is when I talked to you. This is the number of cancellation you gave me. And the guy says, well, I see that in the notes. I don't know what's going on. I said, well, it should be canceled. Yep. And so everything was communicated clearly, and we're going to get, it's still a problem, but we're going to get that problem resolved. So now you might see at the bottom of this cross that we have here, the cross is at the center and core of everything. I didn't set that out at the beginning, which I normally do. Didn't communicate that very well. Mea culpa time. Everything is centered at the cross. All of this planning is in service to the gospel. It's in service to the mission and ministry that the Lord has called us to do. And so we might need to take a look now at this point as we move across into implementation, what expectations might need to be adjusted. So what we had up here, what are our initial expectations? Maybe are back down here. Maybe we need to adjust some of those. Maybe through this planning process, we figured out things need to be a little bit different than we originally thought. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. That's what planning is for. Planning is so that we have proper expectations at the proper time. And so this is the time to take a look at that again. So we've assessed ourselves. We've got a good picture of where we're at and with whom we are working and what's around us. We've started our plan. We've got a strategic plan going. We need to move forward now. We see where we want to head. Now, let's implement things. Again, now this, you might notice a pattern here. We're down to our third most common problem. We fail to plan and assess, we fail to communicate, and oftentimes we fail to implement. We do a great job of planning, but by the time we get through the planning process, we feel like, well, we build it, they should come kind of a situation. We've got this plan down. Why doesn't it just work itself? That's not the way it works. We have to implement the plan. So what's important? How do we look at this partnership implementation? What's important in our agreement? Now, several years ago, in partnership with the Nebraska district, we at LCMS Rural and Small Town Mission developed some new partnership agreements. We have those available to anybody that wants them. I've sent them all over the country. But we changed how we look at partnerships. Again, the old way was that we couldn't afford a pastor. You can't afford a pastor. Let's share one 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, whatever the case may be. And so it was all focused on budget and finance. Well, again, if that's where our focus is, we might exist, but we certainly won't flourish. Chances are, anyway. What we're trying to do is raise that conversation up to mission and ministry. So what's important in our ministry agreement? How do we share? How do we partner together? How do we share ministry together in a functional way that will accomplish that which we have determined that the Lord is calling us to do? So how do we make our ministry agreement? How can it be specific enough yet flexible enough to work with the strengths of each congregation, the assets of each congregation, the blessings of each congregation, and yet shore up those weak points that we have, so that we can complement one another and carry each other, help one another down the road, which is what Synod means in the first place, walking together. And so how do we have a ministry agreement that works on that? And then subsequent to that, if you will, we have our financial agreement. The financial agreement's important. It's something we don't want to live without. It's very necessary. And so we want to have it and we want to put it together well. But that finance agreement is simply, how do we fund the mission? Not, here's our finances. What are we going to be able to do as mission and ministry? We want to get them in their proper perspective. Mission and ministry, and how do we fund the mission and ministry? And that's so very important. How do we structure ourselves so that we don't inhibit the mission of the churches, but yet we're able to accomplish the things that we desire to accomplish. How do we meet our expectations? What's some assistance that we need? How do we look outside of ourselves for assistance? Maybe we need legal, maybe we need financial assistance. Um, Maybe we need to turn to RSTM and get some agreements that we can work on. Where do we look for outside help? The next one, again, is a tough question. Maybe we find through our plan that a ministry has to end. How can we best manage that process so that it is a blessing? There was the Kansas district recently, I guess it's been a little while ago now, but there's a fantastic um, account of a congregation doing that. It's tough, and there's a great story that goes along with it. That's part of that next piece that we'll be taking a peek at. How will we celebrate the beginning of our partnership? Now, this is something that we often fail to do as well. Not a deal breaker necessarily, but we want to help our people celebrate what the Lord is doing. And I think that's something that we do often fail to do. We don't celebrate what the Lord is doing here in this place. It's not us that's accomplishing these things, but it's the Lord using us as His church, as the body of Christ, to work with one another to accomplish His mission. And so we want to make sure that that as we begin this and then as we move along, how are we going to continue to celebrate what the Lord is doing here in this place? And how do we celebrate and evaluate that down the road? And that word evaluation, we're to major pitfall number 4, evaluation. We so often fail to evaluate. We need to keep evaluating how things are going, because if we don't, when these little problems crop up, and they will crop up, sometimes they won't be so little, differing expectations, different ideas on how we should implement things, they will crop up. We don't want that to be a deal breaker. We want to be able to constructively deal with issues that we have. And so, how do we evaluate things so that we have an opportunity to address issues that arise? And that is a plan that we really need to have. Who is going to evaluate what and how? And that's something that we want to definitely do. Finally, we get to the 4th quadrant of this process. Now, let me remind you here. This is not a this, then this, then this, then this, right? It's a little bit like Matthew when we talk about the forgiveness process. In Matthew 18, right? I do this, and then I do this, and then I kick them out, right? No, that's not what we do. I don't go to the person by myself. I don't take one witness. I don't bring it before the church. Then that's it, right? This is a 70 times 7 times thing. This is an opportunity for us to use these things to help us along the way. And so the 4th quadrant is we need to reflect. But really, we are reflecting all the way around here. What's our mission? What are our ministry aims? What is it we would like to change? Is it time? How are we going to do this? This is where, and most people would really start at this point. This is really where we're at when we're asking, who are we? These are questions we want to ask at the beginning on the front side, and then these are questions that we want to ask again at the end. And so these are great. This is a great place to start, and this is a great place to end. That's the reason why I put it as a 4th quadrant instead of the 1st. Primarily because I think we really need to. This needs to be what our self-assessment answers, and then this needs to be what our evaluation answers as we walk through the process. I know I just kind of fire hose information there. I get that that's quite a lot to take in. But again, this information and these resources are completely available on that Kansas District website, which, like I said, I'll share in just a little bit. So I wanted to take a minute. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in that chat feature. But I wanted to move just over here to this partnership model situation. And it looks like that popped up for you. So congregational partnership models. Now, again, these are descriptive, not prescriptive. These are descriptive. They show you some ideas of some things that are out there. We've kind of taken some broad categories and described them a little bit so you have a place to work from. Because a lot of people come into this process thinking, well, there's only the dual parish model or the tri-parish model or something like that. But we can be creative, and we want to be creative based on the evaluations that we've made. And so congregational partnership models, of course, dual parish, that's there. That's out there. It's working in a lot of places. It's not working well in some, and it is working well in others. And so maybe we can find two congregations of similar size that can partner in ministry together. And so it's okay to look at that. Just because it's an old model doesn't mean it's a bad model. I think primarily where that's fallen apart is because people haven't entered into that model in a good way. They've entered into it for financial reasons, and that's it. Now, where I've seen dual parishes really flourish and really have a marked impact in their communities with the gospel, that's where they've entered into partnerships with one another in a more proactive way, in a way that focused on mission and ministry instead of just budget and finance. And there's some great examples of that out there. So dual parish, maybe it's a helping hand. Maybe it's a larger congregation. Excuse me. Maybe it's that larger congregation who wants to assist a smaller congregation. Now, we just had a webinar a couple of months ago with two congregations in Iowa District West in Algona and Burt, Iowa. They've got a great example of this where they needed to add to their professional staffing, but they didn't really need someone full time. And yet they had a congregation nearby that was vacant, that needed a pastor but couldn't afford a full-time pastor, and was struggling in their mission and ministry. So they looked at how can we be in ministry with one another in partnership to accomplish the ministry that we want to accomplish and meet our expectations. And they found that this works. And so it's still a young partnership, but yet it's a really great model. And they've learned some wonderful things through that. So check out our webinars archive and check that out if you're interested in learning more about that. Perhaps it's the idea of the circuit rider. Now, you want to talk about an old model. This is the old model. Before I moved to Madison, Nebraska to be the pastor here at Trinity Lutheran Church, I was in Concordia, Missouri. Concordia, Missouri was a great frontier model type congregation. It was out there on the edge, and the pastor there at one point was a circuit rider. He had to ride his horse out to Colorado and back. I've heard stories and read stories about that. So how can one pastor serve several small churches? I know at one time in the Missouri district down in the boot heel of Missouri, there was kind of a circuit rider scenario set up. It's no longer in operation, but it served a purpose for a time. And there's plenty of these. There's several models up in Montana, in other places as well. So there's models where this works, but the planning has to be done well. How about a regional partnership where one larger congregation partners with a couple of smaller churches? This is what we did when I set up my very first partnership. And I shouldn't say I set up. I was involved with the planning process that developed this regional ministry partnership, where one larger congregation partnered with a couple of other congregations, which were in a dual parish. It was a more of an informal partnership, but yet it was a great partnership, and it continues to this day, and they've actually expanded it even more. So it really was a blessing to all the congregations involved. Then you're looking at multi-site. Maybe you have a congregation that dissolves who they are structurally. Now, remember, this is in all these, we run into the issue of identity, and that's a real sticking point sometimes. People want to maintain that identity. It's like the old school issue where schools consolidate, and boy, we've got to have the school in our town or our town is dead. And the school I went to high school with or in, it doesn't exist anymore, and it's gone through 2 iterations from when I was there. It's nothing what I used to know, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. They're doing what they need to do to educate the children of that area effectively, and that's all right. So we can't get bogged down in the individual identities. Instead, we find our identity in Christ. We are all of one body. And how does that manifest itself in the places he's called us to serve? So multi-site, how can we have one entity become a multi-site type ministry? There's a couple great examples of that down in Kansas and all over the place, but there was particularly one that's been fairly recently developed down there. That's a fantastic story goes along with it. Connect with tech. Now with Zoom and everything, and everybody's become far too acutely aware of how this works through our pandemic and shutdowns. Maybe we can connect with technology to accomplish some of the things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to. So I do every Wednesday morning and evening, I do a Zoom Bible study. At this point in time, we could actually do it live, but I continue to do it Zoom. And we have people outside of our parish that are joining that Bible study because they can. And so you could have several parishes that are working together to have Sunday school, adult Bible class, youth, all of these kinds of things, which you're connecting by tech and then following it up by personal personal contact as well. And then the last one shared here is really that blessed end. One church closes, but there's always the potential to help ministry elsewhere. So if one closes, we close with an idea to get our influence, to get our assistance to flow forward, if you will. Too many times I've seen congregations that tend to want to hoard what they've got, and then they hoard what they have, and we're going to use this and we're going to hunker down, and we are going to cloister off, and we're going to use it till the money runs out, and then we'll just shut the lights off and the building will decay where it's at. But I've seen some really marvelous examples of congregations with some forethought and thinking, instead of budget and finance, thinking mission and ministry, and how can we have an opportunity to point out where we could help and assist in ministry other than in this place right here and right now. So, and then of course we want to make sure that that we have an opportunity to put the other together. How can we maybe do something out of the box a little bit, which doesn't exactly fit any of these bills, but it would fit the bill for what we need where we're at. And so I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just, there are some examples, and on this particular resource, there's some examples, there are considerations, advantages, challenges, all of that. So we wanted to have an opportunity to share those. I do see that we have a question. That's kind of the end of my formal presentation time, and I saw I had a question here from Ken. He said, from district to district, or maybe even within districts, how are districts providing leadership and servanthood with respect to congregational partnerships? For example, I know in Kansas, Dan is working with a lot of congregations needing to partner. He does that as mission exec, and I know other mission executives do. That is not how we're set up here. I was just curious what models there might be for those of us who are on the administrative side of things. Oh, that's a fantastic question, Ken. And I was hoping some would ask is, where do we turn for assistance at this point? And we have a couple of options there. Something that has, and I've gone to a few regional meetings of district presidents where we've discussed this. And what we hope to make available to everyone is an opportunity to do circuit visitor training. And if your district, which many districts aren't really set up so that the mission execs have an opportunity to help with these individual partnerships, we want to do some circuit visitor training so the circuit visitors can help walk these folks along. We've done a little bit of that around here. And so it's an opportunity for the people who are on the ground near to where the partnerships are needing to take effect, and they can kind of be the eyes and the ears. But you're always welcome to contact me, contact us at RSTM, and use those resources as well as pointing people themselves to this information, which is available on the Kansas District website, which is something I wanted to give to all to you right now. that is where you can access all of this, and it's all, like I said, it's all going to be a part of the Making Disciples for Life on the LCMS Making Disciples for Life website as well. Something that we're just in the infancy stages, but we are developing would be a self-directed workshop, if you will, based on the Making Disciples for Life format, so that not unlike what Mark Wood has put out with Revitality and LCMS Mission or LCMS Outreach. It'll be available as a self-directed study so that a person can go through these resources in their congregations or with a group of congregations with the eye towards how can we formulate the partnership. Like I said, at this point, that's in its infancy stages, but it is coming, and it will be, God willing. We can always hope that Jesus returns before that, and it's not necessary, but just in case, we are developing that now. But all of these are available, so congregations can have this made available to them, and then feel free to have them contact me, and I'd be happy to walk through that. Yeah, give me a buzz after they finish that self-study and they have questions. Yeah, you bet. Have them contact me, and normally I can either help them along, or all of the guys who are part of the consortium are more than willing to help other congregations. So what I would normally do is help congregations connect with somebody who's going through a similar process, and then I would have them bounce questions off a pastor who excuse me, it's so dry right now. Have them bounce their questions off of somebody who's gone through a similar process to what they're looking at, and we can connect them. Again, that's what Synod's for. We are walking together, so we want these leaders of congregations to be able to work together and to bounce questions off one another. Hopefully that answered your question, Ken. Any other questions we've got out there? I'm not seeing any at the moment, but if you have one, now would be a fantastic time to get that in there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and there's going to be a too big picture of me right now. But just wanted to mention to you, we do have other webinars coming up. This archive will be there, so if folks want to use this website or this webinar as an opportunity to walk themselves through the process, or at least get an idea if somebody's just toying with the idea, it would be a good way to do that, is to take a look at this and other. There's a couple of other really good partnership webinars out there that I could direct them to and give them links to as well. Just going to mention that we do have deaconesses in the rural and small town congregation, and again, that type of partnership model where we're maybe sharing unique staffing. And there's also that's coming up in December, on December 10th. And so watch for that webinar and take advantage of that if you're looking at unique staffing models. And then you also have the opportunity to excuse me here, I'm trying to catch up on these. We also have the opportunity to share with one another some great ideas, and that's how we came about. There are some partnerships now forming strictly around administrative partnerships, where you have congregations that are centralizing their administration so that the congregations can free themselves up from that type of duty, if you will. And so that's some new information that's going to be coming out. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out very soon. And you bet. Thanks, Ken, for asking how's the dissertation coming. I am neither finished nor close, but it is coming. It is in the process. So hopefully, God willing, eventually I'll have that dissertation done, and maybe if if we're blessed enough, Jesus will return and I won't have to write anymore. So, but it's been great to be with you guys. Seeing no more questions, I will bid you adieu. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. We sent you. I gave you that. Kansas District link. Also, our email was put on there, but just Google, get on our RSTM at lcms.org email and shoot me an email. I'm glad to help you in any way that I possibly can. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. And the Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Amen. God's blessings to you all. Glad you were here.